Hello and welcome to the Law of No Return, the podcast dedicated to exploring the law of the No Returniverse. Why, you might ask? Surely people didn't actually ask for this, and you are right. This here podcast exists as a creative outlet to prevent Keijo, master of story and song, from letting all that troublesome world building that he's obsessed with from getting in the way of a good story. And we're going to start by diving into one of the most pivotal moments in the history of La Tari, something you may have heard referenced in the show, called the Treaty of Budan. It's a treaty which underpins both the national and supranational structures which govern the many diverse peoples of the North Hub. So without further ado, let's get to it. The Treaty of Budan, named after the city of Budan where the treaty was signed, sitting on the border between the mountain nation of Turk and the sprawling arid nation of Vash. This treaty was a game changer, not just because it ended the Time of Tears, but because it set the foundation for everything that followed. To really understand the Treaty of Budan, we need to go right back to the aftermath of the 3 world curses that you likely heard about in the Nymphaeum. This period is called the Era of Silence. And it wasn't just a poetic name, the gods themselves literally went silent, leaving the world in chaos. The wildland blight swallowed entire cities, towns and villages, entire generations orphaned by the orphaning. Their parents turned vacant. Physically there, but their essence, their will, gone forever. Now it's hard to imagine just how horrifying the Time of Tears must have been, but the result was absolute chaos. Civilizations, as people knew it, was falling apart. War, famine, disease, all the classical signs of societal collapse were rampant. People call this the Time of Tears for good reason. Fast forward to the miracle that was the Treaty of Budan. Somehow, a few nations managed to hold on to a shred of order amidst the chaos. Amedu, Turk, Dranek, Vash, Shimi, and the newly formed Kingdom of Lern. Now these nations were led by young leaders who saw the writing on the wall. If they didn't unite, if they didn't cooperate, there was only one ending for them. But how did these nations, all with their own agendas and internal strife, actually come together? Enter the Wupo, a shadowy, mystical group of seers and sages. Now, not a lot of people know an awful lot about them, and that's just how they like it. But the Wupo played a major role in bringing the leaders of these fledgling and ancient nations together, helping them to draft the Treaty of Budan, which focused on achieving 4 main goals: stopping the wildland blight, establishing order among warring factions, feeding the starving people of the North Hub, and recovering the lost knowledge of the ancestors and the gods. Now this wasn't just some paper agreement, it set up real, actual, tangible structures, such as the Boundary Vanguard, a neutral military alliance tasked with pushing back the wildland, as well as a research hub dedicated to rediscovering ancient knowledge. Oh, and they also later introduced the staplery system to make sure that everyone had enough to eat. This wasn't just about peace, this was about survival. Now, if you think the story of the treaty ends there, you'd be wrong. Not everyone was thrilled about the terms of the treaty. The Lernians in particular had a huge problem with it. They felt that the treaty's clauses on sovereignty and alliance prevented them from reclaiming Amedu, their ancestral homeland. So, in classical Lernian fashion, they took matters into their own hands. They refused to sign the treaty and instead embarked on a brutal journey of autarky, towards self-sufficiency and military dominance. Autocratic magocracy, a state that ruled through fear and magical military prowess. They became the looming shadow over the rest of the North Hub, waiting for their chance to strike. While everyone was dealing with politics, territorial disputes, and the wildland blight, another curse was quietly creeping through the world: the affliction. This fertility plague was slowly reducing the populations of every nation. The Nymphaeum was the first to recognize the full scope of the problem, but by the time they'd made their formal announcement, most people had already figured it out, and the projections were grim. Within 13 generations, society would no longer be sustainable. The world would be well on its way to extinction. This news sent shockwaves through the North Hub. Some nations enacted harsh social policies, particularly against women, in a panic-driven attempt to solve the problem. But there was resistance. Many women, with the help of allies, fought back, forcing the treaty nations to acknowledge a new network of advocates, the Griffia. These women's rights advocates played a huge role in securing the Varan contracts, which replaced traditional marriage in many places with more flexible unions aimed at encouraging conception and protecting women's rights more generally. In response to the looming extinction threat, the treaty nations focused on mitigation and adaptation. They worked to slow the effects of the affliction, managing population decline by consolidating people into megacities, leaving many of the old urban centres abandoned. They also worked to improve health standards through universal basic education, removing children from the workforce and placing them in schools called orientation houses, more commonly referred to as Orient. But despite their efforts, population decline continued. Everywhere, except for Lern. Lern, ever the outlier, established a rigid universal breeding program and switched to a matrilineal society. With strict autocratic control, they achieved something the other nations couldn't: zero population growth, or zero population decline. This gave them the strategic edge. Instead of actually having to invade their neighbours, they could instead adopt a long-game approach, simply waiting for the rest of the North Hub to wither away, so that they can sweep in unopposed. So what does the future hold for the treaty nations? Will they find a cure for the affliction? Or will they continue to decline while Lern waits in the wings? The Treaty of Budan may have saved the world once, but whether it can hold up against these new challenges is a whole other question. Well, that's it for today, folks. I do hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Treaty of Budan and its aftermath. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.